I'm going to kick this thing off now. We have a lot of ground to cover. Tony Weber's not here yet. We know he's here. He was here earlier. Cookie Marenko from Blue Coast Recordings will be joining us for the second half of the seminar. Paul Stubblebine's here. I think they all think it's going to start at 2, and we did not know it was supposed to start at 1:45 till this morning. So we'll just go ahead and proceed.
There's Tony.
Is Tony here? Oh, welcome, Tony.
And we have some handouts that are going to be passed out from the side over here.
You need one more plug? Okay. So let me start by introducing everybody. This originally all got started with a group of us out of Northern California who've known and worked with each other on and off for 20, 25, even in some cases 30 years. So we were putting on our first seminar, I forget where, but out of the audience jumps this guy in a red shirt, and it says "Carry Audio," and he starts waving his arms and pointing at the graphs we had up, saying, "Pay attention," and he starts explaining what we're doing. So now we have Tony that joined us, and he broke the Northern California tradition. Okay. Tony has been in the business for about 40 years. He's a composer. He's an arranger. Among other things, he's studied acoustics as well as musical instruments with Dr. Harvey Fletcher. And he's studied trumpet with Doc Severinsen. There's many other things Tony's done, but those are some of the highlights. He's now with Carry Audio and functions as a regional sales manager. Tim Brisson, my oldest son, is a patent attorney and loves music. Grew up in a household with music, and he's also a musician. He has 2 bands. He has a 9-piece horn band that does Memphis soul, and he also has a blues band. In fact, we will be releasing a disc on the blues with his band through MIT sometime next year, which will also function as a tool to learn with. That's what everything we're doing right now is kind of aimed in that direction. Later on, Cookie Marenko from Blue Coast Recording will join us. She has a great history. She's kind of like a dark, legendary person who was in the background in Northern California. Always wanted to meet Cookie, but could never find her. So finally we met a couple of years ago, and Cookie still records with tape, and she mixes down through DSD. I'm going to let her explain to you what DSD is and why she does that. Part of the reason we put on these seminars is just to teach, so that hopefully we can help you people when you go out to spend your money, get your money's worth. That's all this really is. We're not really here to sell anything, just to teach. The other individual from the recording industry that will be with us today is Paul Stubblebine, who had a great mastering career that spanned over 25 years and did all of the mastering for reference recordings for 25 years. We've asked Paul to join us because he now also has a company that some of you may have heard of, which is called the Tape Project. And anybody, I think, I can speak for everybody on this one subject up here, because there are differing opinions in some arenas, but we all believe tape is still the best medium, okay? The record we're doing with Tim right now, we went to 24 track, and then we're going to mix it down to PCM, pulse-coded modulation from there. So Paul has a lot to say, and he'll particularly have a lot to say about compression. One of the things that I'd like to establish right now is I favor no format, whether it's DSD or PCM. there was a rumor for a while that I was favoring DSD. Well, that's only because we couldn't get anybody here from reference recordings to talk about PCM. So we're going to let you people make up your own minds on that. We just want to let you know where to go to find it and why. And I'm going to establish that a little deeper in some opening statements later on. It's actually my great privilege today to have an old friend of mine here from, well, he's from Texas now. Used to be from Washington. And this gentleman, retired Colonel Lowell Graham, has helped me immensely over the years. I came out of a technical background, and I was a music lover. And I think, as most of you know, my first product that I introduced was interlink reference with Monster Cable. I never really wanted a company, believe me, I didn't. And what I did do is I came up with some technology. I just wanted to license it to Knoll. At Monster Cable, that didn't work. And I did start up my own company, MIT. But Lowell brought to me, and I've asked him to come here today to bring to you some simple statements that really help me understand music. Okay. You know, what an octave, not essentially what an octave was, but an octave, a unison, a perfect fifth, major third, and so forth, consonance and dissonance, terms like that, which I'm going to let he and Tony and my son speak on later on. Lowell was formerly the commander and conductor of the United States Air Force premier musical organization, headquartered out of Washington, D.C. As a colonel in the United States Air Force, he became the senior ranking musician in the Department of Defense. Okay, it is really my special privilege to welcome you and thank you for coming. With that, I'm going to make a statement and then turn it over to what I call the Tony and Tim Show, which now is expanded into the Lowell Show, which is no longer encompassing just Northern California, okay? What is it an audiophile has control over? This is a very big statement, and in the end, I'm going to repeat a portion of it because as we move through this seminar, you need to remember something very specifically, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. The audiophile, when you're listening, has no control over the rhythm, the beat, or the general pace of the music. Agree? Okay. What do you have some control over? Tonality, timbre, and spatial cues, and layering effects, imaging, and so forth, okay? You only have a limited control there. So an understanding of what timbre is, what textures are, they're derived from timbre, and how you get dimension, spatial cues, and layering effects out of your system then, I believe is what this is all about. Most of you, I think, have graduated from, you get into this hobby, which creates an addiction, and it's very expensive, because you wanted to hear good music and you wanted to hear an image in between two speakers, okay? Most of us, I think, have all graduated into and beyond the sizzle, bang, boom moment. You go out and you buy the biggest speakers, the most powerful amps, and you play them as loud as you can, and the more bass you got, the better off you are. Sizzle, bang, boom, okay? Lowell and I just had a discussion about this in the hallway, and the boom really irritates him, and the sizzle really irritates me. Okay, all right. So from there, you begin to look into the real high-end audio. From there, timbre and spatial cues and dimension become very, very critical. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Tony and Tim Show. Thank you.
So one thing we want to start out by showing you is, or actually playing you, are two tones. Tone 1 and tone 2. I'll do those again. There's a slight difference in those tones, right? We can all hear that, and this is not always a given, because when we do this, I never know what PA we're going to have. But the second one was a little brighter, had a little more sizzle, as Bruce said, on the top, right? Those are both the same tone, the same pitch, the 500 hertz tone, played at the same level, but there's a slight difference in timbre. What we're going to do today is explain how I created that difference in timbre, and along the way, teach you how we view timbre, how we work to preserve timbre, and how that leads to a texture in your system. At the end, we'll show you a plot of what we call articulation at MIT. We're not going to spend a lot of time, or very little time actually, on cable technology, but we'll show you how we apply our teachings to preserve timbre. Where we want to begin is, what is music? What is music and sound? We had a long discussion last night at dinner, didn't we, on what this was. And one thing that's not on this slide is, for all of us up here, the reason we're really in this business is the aesthetic experience, right? I perform, I think we all perform live. Lowell's a conductor, Tony's a conductor and a performer. And for us, the whole goal here is capturing that aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience being the experience of a total mind and body and soul experience. And the whole thing, what I think we're trying to do here, is take that experience and recapture it in your listening room anytime, anywhere, right? But at its essence, music is an art form whose medium is sound and silence. And so many of us that play instruments forget the silence part, right? It's all, especially lead guitar players, right? It's all about the sound. But it's about sound and silence. And at its essence, what we're doing is we're trying to recreate how those air molecules were moved by the original instrument, whether it was an acoustic instrument or whether it was an amplifier connected to my speaker. That's essentially what we're trying to do in our sound system. And accurately reproducing the original sound pressure pattern of the original performance that was recorded is ultimately the goal of any high-end audio system. As Bruce mentioned, music has some common elements, some that the audiophile has control over, and some we don't. We'll try to cover those real quick here. The first being pitch, the ordering of sounds on some scale. If someone who has perfect pitch could have listened to that pitch I just played you and said, oh, that's about a B, right? The B above 440. How the perception, how one perceives those, how they fall on a scale, that is the essence of pitch. Now, we had some discussion last night at dinner about what is rhythm, the other component of music, and apparently I don't have this quite correct on here. You want to pick that up? Are you on?
The quick definition of rhythm are the long and short values within a beat. We have a pulse, a steady recurring beat, and it's the long and short values within that da 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 da, as opposed to a pulse. That's rhythm.
The other component is dynamics, how loud or soft you play a note, whether a piece is speeding up or slowing down. I think the point that Bruce was making is those three elements, the audiophile really doesn't have a lot of control over that. Of course, you could play your 33 record at 45. It'll sound like the Chipmunks. The pitch will go up, the rhythm will increase, and the dynamics will go away. But in general, those three elements, in other words, if I play a record on one system and the song is in the key of G, and it's playing at 100 beats per minute. If I played it on another system, assuming that playing the same speed, those elements are going to remain constant. That's not true of some other elements of music, including timbre. Now, timbre, to me, is that audio fingerprint or that voice print that makes one instrument sound different from another. Tony will show you here in a few minutes samples of different instruments playing the same note at the same pitch, and how your ear can tell that one is a trumpet, one is an oboe. We'll get into a little more detail behind exactly what is timbre here in a few seconds. But for me, it's that fingerprint that says, oh, that's a trumpet or that's an oboe. We're going to talk a couple other elements of music here, and one is the octave. You want to take a shot at that, and I'm going to demonstrate it here in a second.
Now the green light came on. The octave is the closest thing to the unison. You all remember your 8th grade science class when they had one vibrating string and you divided it exactly in half. The pitch went up an octave or eight steps. And that is the closest thing that we have to a unison. It is not a unison, but it is 1 octave higher. Go ahead.
Here's a G. Look at my Fender sound on. There's the up. And this is, some people call this one of the miracles of music, because this occurs very naturally, the way that the...
It's also called puberty.
Why don't you explain that?
No.
No? But the Western systems, Eastern systems, the octave appears somewhere in all of these systems. Well, so what I just demonstrated was I had a G right here, and then I went up there. That's another G. Those are, this one is double the frequency of that one. So if I played 440, that's that there. That would be 880 and 220. The ratio of those frequencies is always 2 to 1. They're double. They're double, they're halved. We'll talk about harmonics for a second. This is going to lead us into the definition of timbre. Another one of the really interesting things naturally about how instruments form sounds is that whether it's a string or a column of air, something is going to vibrate, and those vibrations are going to take place in even integers. We just did the octave, that was 2, but they'll be twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times the frequency. And it just so happens that due to the way that the natural spacings occur in instruments, these end up at these magical whole number integers. When a string is plucked, if I play that G, it's not just hitting that one note at a time. I have a slide here in a second that'll show you there's actually a whole lot of frequencies going on at once on this. They all happen to be in those natural integers, and we call those harmonics. So if the fundamental note, the lowest note, the next harmonic above that will be twice that note and 3 times the frequency, and so on and so forth. This ascending series of harmonics is called the harmonic series. You want to demonstrate that here?
Absolutely.
You got a mic?
I do. I do have a mic. This is, if you were, I played trumpet once upon a time along with other things, but if a bugle, as you're probably aware, is a trumpet without valves, and you change notes by increasing your lip pressure and the amount of air. A bugle, if it were Biggs, so let's call it a trombone right now. If I had a trombone with me, which can play all these notes, and I had a really good embouchure to get up that high, I would not have to change the slide at all, and I could play every one of these notes. These are the even integers that Tim was talking about. This note, this is a C, it's a low C, and that's actually about 65 hertz, but if we call this 100, put zeros here, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. As you see, every note's getting closer and closer together. In our Western music system, we have 12 steps, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, so on. We have 12 steps in an octave. The first octave here, doubling, gives us 2 steps, or 1 step. The next octave is 2, the next octave is 4. The top octave here is 8 steps. What happens in the next octave? We have 16 steps, and there's only 12 steps to our Western ears. So that's when things start falling in the cracks and start getting unusual. Let me just play this so you can hear, again, if I had a trombone here and just started playing, what this would sound like. Assuming we have some volume. Okay, hang on. Speaker on.
I'm not getting anything from you.
That's what we get for not having a test here before.
Oh.
Well, I'll just talk for a minute. We'll go.
While you fix that, I have something to say.
Okay.
Throughout this discussion, you're going to hear 2 terms. One is a harmonic, which is related by a whole number. They're called integers. They're also called simple numbers because, believe it or not, we work with 10 or less, so we can count simply on both hands. That's where the term came from. We make at MIT, because we're working in the electrical state, we go through great pains to make sure that as the musical waveform goes through the cable, that only the octaves and the harmonics, which we optimize out to 7 harmonics. We don't believe optimizing out beyond that is worthwhile because you're getting too close to the next octave. And if anything gets imbalanced, you have dissonance. Okay, dissonance, simply put, is something that's not pleasing to listen to, and consonance, simply put, is something that's pleasant to listen to. Okay, so in the electrical state, we don't want overtones. However, when Lowell speaks, he's going to talk about natural overtones. Okay, acoustically, musicians' instruments produce overtones. They're fractions. They can be 1.12, 1.096. It makes no difference. There's decimal equivalents. The signature of one musical instrument to another musical instrument, if played in exactly the same manner, is largely due to the harmonic structure and the overtone structure, a combination of both. It's the recording engineer's duty, priority, to capture all of that, even if it sounds bad, okay, as it does sometimes in studios. No.
Always sounds good.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Fix it in the mix.
Yeah, fix it in the mix, right. Yeah, got one of them new whiz-bang systems, right. Anyhow, so when Lowell starts speaking about overtones, don't get confused, because he's working acoustically and we're working electrically. Are you prepared? Or do I have to go on more?
I'm happy to go on.
You are? Okay, all right. Damn, I was looking forward to it.
For some reason, we're not talking to the mixer. So.
You're still not talking to the mixer?
I'm not talking to the mixer. So
you can go on.
That's on the next slide.
We'll move on, and in the meantime, move your computer over here, and I'll plug you in over here because you got those tones that come up.
You want to do that?
Right? I'll plug you in over here.
I thought you had those in your slides.
No, I took those out because you wanted to control it with your computer. In the meantime,
Let's just continue.
we're moving on. Yeah. So at the top, we played that tone for you. Here's the first tone. This is a plot that shows the fundamental, which is in red, and the harmonics in blue. So this is how I constructed that 500 hertz tone. I have a little tone generator in the Mac, and I made a 500 hertz tone at 0 dB, and then I had a 1,000 hertz second harmonic at 3 dB down, and so forth. And that is the tone that you heard. So the definition of timbre is the relative arrangement of those harmonics relative to the fundamental, their presence or absence, and how high or low they are in relation to the fundamental, okay? Now, the way that instruments produce this and come up with their own individual timbre, unique timbre, I have an example of a guitar string, since this is the only instrument that I know. And not like these other guys. I can only play one instrument. This is it, baby. On the top there's a guitar string vibrating. That would be the fundamental. So that would be this one, say this note right here. An open string, this is the open E. The next one down is the octave. You can see it's split in half, that's why the frequency is there. That happens when you hit it right here, right? So what I'm doing here is splitting the string in half. You can see those two dots right here. See, guitar players, we kind of have to play by braille, so they tell us with two big dots where the midpoint of the neck is so we don't miss it, see? And that's right there. So there's the open string, the thick string, and there's that one right there. The next, and then so on, so forth up there. You hear that? And there's that. There's that. What happens when you hit a note on a guitar, though, is all that really happens at once. So when the string is vibrating freely, it's vibrating in an orbit with the big string, with the big one on top, And there's some of the octave mixed in there, and there's some of the third one there, which represents the fifth above the octave. You put that all together, and that's how the ear places that together as timbre. So different guitars with different strings, or even where you play on the string. For example, if I play up here, I move closer. You hear it get brighter? If I play back up towards the neck, it'll get a little deeper. What I'm doing with my pick there is forcing other harmonics to be formed and changing the timbre of the sound. So if you want to play a surf tune, you would play real hard down here by the bridge, and if you want to play a little softer like jazz, you would play up there. That's one way the timbre is formed on here. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to have Tony move his computer over here. I'm going to plug him in, and we're going to play you some sound samples of three instruments playing the same note, along with harmonic spectrum graphs of those instruments. Want to slide on over?
Yeah. So to use a term that's overly used in this industry, the term is linear, which also could mean that was you. Poor Tony. Another word for linear is predictability. Nonlinear means non-predictable in a more or less manner of sense. You don't want to add or subtract from these harmonics. You don't want to raise some of the harmonics in the higher frequencies, which cables can do. That's if you look at our articulation plots, it shows you that. And you don't want to, in recording, compress, because that then brings down the highs, brings up the lows, and all of the notes, the integer values, become deformed. And the other thing you're doing is reducing the dynamic range when you compress. So later on, when Cookie and Paul are here, and I believe that Lowell wants to comment on this. Lowell says, no, you gotta let me comment on this last night, how compression destroys, I'm gonna use a broad term, tonality, okay, which is timbre, which is linear harmonics, which is also, which integer harmonics, and which is also overtones or fractions. So if we begin to change that, we've changed the tone of the voice or the instrument, whatever we're recording. You ready? No? Oh yeah, you're ready. I can hear it. Not gonna work? Okay, well, do you want us just to move on, then we'll come back to you?
We want to show the... Where's my cable?
Sorry, just hang tight. Just give us a moment. Technical difficulties.
Have to imagine the sound in your head.
Well, I have a quick question while you're talking about this harmonics. Is timbre then determined solely by reference to the relative prevalence of the harmonics associated with the bass tone?
Yes. Its fundamental frequency plus the relative strengths of all the harmonics is what gives an instrument its corresponding sound.
Likewise
A voice as well, certainly.
A voice also has a lot of overtones in it. Boy, we're just a wreck here today. Got a full house and we can't do a damn thing right. Yeah, it's the presence of certain harmonics that are found in nature. Any sound in nature has that declining. Tim had it up earlier. You've seen it in magazines 100 times, 1,000 times. No, go back. It's the this one. This is how nature is right here. Okay, you have your fundamental. No, you went too far. Your fundamental, your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth. They're all whole numbers, aren't they? If I make that into a fraction,
I can do that.
if we make this into a fraction, if we were to add spectra in between here, or if we were to, and if Tim hasn't done this, he's going to do it. If we were to raise that fifth, you'd have that annoying sizzle that I hate. Okay, if you were to shrink this down and pull this up and then create overtones in here, you're going to have that boom of the sizzle bang boom. Okay? Rick Fryer and I, it's funny, at Spectral, we used to spend a lot of time together. This gentleman's laughing. So we sat down one night. Rick is a pretty, how shall we say it, he stands right, he was brought up right, he eats right, and so forth. But you get 1.5 Mexican beers in him. And he is the funniest guy you've ever met. So we decided one night on some napkins to write down this whole story about audio. The image, the sizzle, bang, boom, and I've never forgot it. We ready for you again?
Yeah. You've all heard different instruments playing. This is an oboe. Oboe, how would you describe the sound? Kind of bright, almost nasal to a point. That's one of the reasons an oboe is used to tune an orchestra to, because it's a very piercing sound that's very easily heard. The real reason, the main reason though, is an oboe has no sliding parts like a clarinet or flute or a brass instrument. The only way you can tune an oboe is by trimming the length of the reed. So the oboe player has to come out, if they're tuning to a piano or whatever for playing a piano concerto, he tunes to the piano, and then the rest of the orchestra tunes to him because he can't do a thing about it once it's there. Here is our A440, if you will, right there. That's the fundamental frequency. The second harmonic at 880 is there. Then we go up to add another to that. Third harmonic, fourth harmonic is down in amplitude, fifth harmonic is up, sixth harmonic is down, seventh harmonic is up. So it's all odd order harmonics that are the prevalent ones, and that's what gives it that very, very bright, piercing sound. And if we can go on to the next instrument, is a trumpet. Now here you see your fundamental, your second and third are pretty much equal. Fourth is as high as the original, even a little bit higher than the fundamental, and then it tapers off. But look how many harmonics are there. It's going out to just dozens and dozens and dozens of them. The oboe dropped off very, very quickly. The trumpet just kind of goes on forever, and it gives it its characteristic sound.
One thing that's interesting is the highest harmonic is not the fundamental in this one, is it?
No. No, it's not. Second, third harmonics are higher than the fundamental. Now here's a flute. A flute has a very warm, very mellow sound. You hear the breathiness of the player blowing and so on, but it's a very warm sound. Here's our fundamental again. The second harmonic is much, much higher than the fundamental, substantially higher. Third harmonic is higher, and then you get to the fourth and fifth, and then it just drops off the cliff, and there's nothing there. So that makes the flute a fairly simple sound and gets rid of all that complex buzzing and brightness, Bruce's sizzle, if you will. A flute doesn't have a lot of sizzle. It's a very nice, mellow, warm sound. And that comes from this harmonic structure. And that is exactly why various instruments sound different from one another. It's why two different bows on a violin can create different tonalities. A $3,000 bow and a $10,000 bow will sound different because they're exciting the string differently. Yes, sir?
Can you say something about the line you've got?
The what?
Subharmonics. Subharmonics under here. He's talking about subharmonics under the fundamental frequency, where all that's coming from. A lot of that may be room noise when these were recorded. I don't know. I'm sorry, but I can't really address a whole lot of that.
Is this mic working? You guys are going to laugh. The battery just went out in this mic.
Well,
we're going to make this. We're going to play this show out. We're going to make it here.
That's right. Well, let's move on to
Now the reveal. So how did I create those two tones at the top of the show here? This is it. All I did was move in the tone generator that fifth harmonic up to where you see it on the right. That's all I did. So I changed the timbre of that note by doing one simple thing. Now it's a little bit exaggerated. I moved that fifth pretty high to make it so you could hear it through the PA, but that's all that happened. Now we've been talking about playing one note at a time. The difference in the timbre of a steady note played at a steady rate is the difference in the harmonics. What happens when you play two notes at once? To describe what happens with two notes at once, we need to define what an interval is. That's the distance between two notes. And musicians talk in terms of intervals having a certain quality or a number. Lowell, you want to talk about that for a second? And I can play some on the guitar if you call them out.
It's interesting that as music developed, we first started with the unison and go back to chant. All goes back to chant. And then, of course, we had boys involved, and we had the octaves. But in church, you have this very ringy acoustic. And it's very easy to think that you're hearing the fundamental or a pitch, and you will sing the next one, which is what I will call the third partial. Fundamental is one, the first overtone, which would be the second partial, and third partial is the fifth. And then the next one is the octave again. And in music, we call those perfect intervals. And it's really interesting because of the nature of how that happened. Everything else, in talking about consonant and dissonances of seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths, are imperfect intervals. So the qualities that we have with Pythagoras, and we go back to that gentleman, of figuring out this series that we've been talking about, and I don't want you to glaze over by any means, but we have perfect intervals and imperfect intervals.
What's a perfect interval?
An octave, a unison, a fifth, and a fourth.
Would you mind explaining why? Or
because that is the closest thing that we have to a unison. That's why it's perfect.
Okay, so if we have a sine wave,
yes,
that's the octave, let's say.
Yeah,
between two sine waves.
Between two sine waves, that would be an octave.
So if we have an octave here and an octave here, they're going.
That's all perfect.
Explain that. It's going to be perfect.
Yes.
Why?
Because it's the closest relationship to the unison in even.
Okay, so now we go back to the sine wave.
Yes.
Okay, we have a beginning.
Yes.
We cut through here, and we have an end.
Yes.
Right. So the next octave up is going to be half this octave, and it's going to cut
twice.
Right back through here.
Correct.
Right.
It'll intersect.
Right. Intersect, exactly. That's extremely important in music reproduction. If it doesn't do that in a recording or through a system, you're not going to hear you're not going to hear the original event. It has to do that. That is part of phase aligning something. Okay, so yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay, so now why is a fifth perfect? Because
it's, again, if any of you have ever been in music and you've tried to write four-part writing, you hear this terrific thing: no parallel octaves, no parallel fifths. Again, parallel octaves, parallel fifths, it's the closest thing to unison, and you've destroyed the independence of another voice. And in four-part writing, you want four independent parts. If you write a unison or an octave, that's three parts. The fifth is, by the nature of hearing it, is the closest thing to the unison that we have, and that's...
Yeah, this is hard to carry in your head. We're not going to go on with this too much, but he's brought in terms that we haven't used in this presentation before, and I just want some clarification, particularly through the video. Okay. And once again, if we start to compress that, Tony, particularly Paul, and I believe Lowell, is going to get into that later on. We're going to spend some time on what compression does. It then takes this astute gentleman noticed on the flute graph that there was some anomalies below it, some spectra below it that came up. Okay. Why it's up there, we don't know actually here, but we're going to look into that before we come back out with it next time. You don't want things growing in there, so to speak. Engineers call it grass. Those are your overtones, okay?
So let's make a C major chord for him. Call the notes out. I'm going to put the microphone down, and I'll play it for you.
C, E, G.
So some intervals are consonant and some are dissonant. One of my favorite dissonant intervals is this one. The Black Sabbath riff. The flatted fifth, the Devil's Tritone. Right. Once we have multiple instruments playing, from a composer's standpoint, there's what's called the texture of a piece, the way the melody and the harmonic materials are combined in the composition. The overall density of the sound in a piece. I'd like the composers to talk about this. This was part of what you're watching is sort of the dinner we had last night, and this came up. How do you define the texture of a piece, Lowell?
The density. I think I'm on 20 questions here. Texture is the thickness, the density of the music. That's texture. How many voices may be playing at one time? That gives you texture. Again, a solo voice, a very thin texture. Several voices, a thick texture. And they could all be playing the same pitch, but it doesn't make any difference. But the texture changes.
So the number of character, the type of parts that are playing in the piece. So the composer would choose the type of instruments. If you wanted a darker piece, if we were playing that Black Sabbath, you would choose a certain tone for that, for example. The important part, I think, of texture, what brings us to this point, is in order to resolve the texture of a piece, you have to resolve the individual timbre of each of the constituent instruments in the piece. In other words, without a system resolving the proper timbre, you can't ultimately resolve the texture of the piece. And ultimately, the goal to reproduce this aesthetic experience that we talked about at the top is to capture the dynamics and the color of all those things that you feel when it's live, including the three-dimensional layering, the creation of a soundstage in your system, the holy grail of a system. But in order to do that, you've got to maintain, all of those individual harmonics in the piece together. So if the system doesn't do something right and makes those harmonics come out of whack, you're not going to resolve the timbre of the piece. And if you can't resolve the timbre of the piece, you're not going to resolve the texture of the piece.
It's an almost impossible job what we ask engineers to do in listening and recording properly, and it's an even more close to impossible job asking our playback systems to do all this. A minute ago, Tim played a simple C major chord, C, E, and G. If you think of that in a guitar, that's pretty simple through his little speaker. Have a 120-piece orchestra playing that same C major chord with all the different tonal colors, and just think, we talked about how overtones are what make the instrument sound right. C, the fifth, the perfect fifth, is a G. G is part of the C major chord. E, which is the third in there, the middle note, its third in its chord is a G sharp. So it's half a step off. So these two notes are different from each other. Different instruments have different relative strengths. The harmonics have harmonics. They all interact with each other. And trying to resolve this texture, it's easy, it's relatively easy to play a single instrument, or, you walk around this building, it's jazz trio with a female vocalist, and I like to tell people there's a lot more to life than that. Much as I may enjoy it, there's a lot more to listen and to evaluate a system than something that simple. If you really want to hear what it does, you listen to something fairly complex that's well recorded. And that is almost an impossible task. And I am, after 42 years in this business and recording things with Grammy nominations and this and that, I am just in awe of how close we get these days, how good things sound. There was a stereo chain back in the Philadelphia area many years ago. It was swallowed up by the Tweeter group and has gone out of business. It was called Bryn Mawr Stereo. And their tagline on their commercials was, "We sell goosebumps." And isn't that perfect? Isn't that what it's all about? At the Newport show last year, I was doing some demonstrations and playing things, and I had a family come in. There's like 30 people in this little small hotel room. It's just jammed. And this couple came in with a little 4-year-old girl. And I get done playing, and I turn to the audience and ask if somebody has something they'd like to listen to. So the wife says, "How about a female vocalist?" I'm thinking, oh, no. So I'm quickly scanning my little memory bank here for what I've got, and I realized on one of my discs I had a sequence of Jane Monheit doing Over the Rainbow, which is, audiophile approved, beautiful, small combo, going into Tierney Sutton doing this scat arrangement of Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. So I walked over and I squatted down in front of the little girl and I said, "Have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz?"
She said, yeah. And did you like it? Yeah. So I got up and I said, this little lady has given us a request, and I'm going to play some music for her. So I put on the Jane Monheit, and she gets through her little introduction. She starts singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and this little 4-year-old voice pipes up and sings along in the front row. And everybody turns and looks at her, and she got real, embarrassed and buried her head in her dad's shoulder. So I let it play for a moment, and I faded it down, and I skipped forward to the Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. Well, after 8-measure introduction, she starts in with Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. This little girl jumped up, grabbed her dad by the hand, pulled him up, and started to dance. And I wish I had video cameras going. In 40-plus years in the business, that set it right there. She wasn't listening to the equipment. She wasn't, listening to anything. She was enjoying the music. She was feeling the music. She had goosebumps, and I just about got tears out of it. But that is what it's all about, folks. We're after reproducing music. We don't sell equipment to you. We don't sell cables. I don't sell amplifiers. We sell music. We sell enjoyment. And that's what it's all about. And I think if you understand music a little bit better, plus are like me in awe of the job that our poor systems have to do, just sit back and close your eyes and smell the roses.
That's a great segue.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. This is a wonderful panel, and my background is not a double E guy. I'm not in that mode, but I have been fortunate enough to be in and around this business, and I want to share a little bit of what I do and what may help connect the dots here very rapidly. I'm a conductor. I'm a music director, been in this business for a very, very long time, made many, many recordings, and have been associated with some real giants in our industry, for which I'm thankful that they've helped me and educate me so that I could learn a little bit more about what they do and how that relates to the goosebump. We've talked a lot about timbre, and I think it's really simple that we just remember that timbre is quality and there's texture, and there are many, many things that are involved with this. And when we then have this magical moment that we do of making music, we want to capture it so that we can relive this moment. I think there are three things that we as listeners and musicians want to do, and that's why we continue to listen to music and not just talk about the technical aspects. First of all, it's autonomy. It's something that it's larger than ourselves, and it engages us. We want to be involved in something, the mastery of something, and that we want to get better. Our equipment gets better because we want to achieve something, and then certainly being part of something much bigger than ourselves. This is why I think that we are all in music. But as a conductor, I'm just like you as a listener, and I want to put this in perspective. I physically do not make any music. I don't bow anything. I don't hit a drum. I don't have a reed vibrating. But I'm controlling things. I'm controlling timbre, and I will use that in relationship to the words that we use in trying to interpret music. Just think of these two words, ruvido, which means rude and rough and gruff, and flotando, which is a floating sound. Okay, now I may be looking at the string section and it needs to be a ruvido. Well, the timbre, the texture will change. Okay, but they're doing it, I'm not. They do it, I encourage that. So I have a little bit of control. I control not a whole lot when it comes to those kinds of things. But we develop our own sound. The reason that you can tell the difference in a recording or in person between the Philadelphia Orchestra and the New York Philharmonic is that sound. They have the same instruments, but they're different. You can call me, Bruce can call me. Now, the range on our cell phone is not that wide, but immediately I know it's Bruce's voice. Immediately we pick up on that. So our ear is a very, very sensitive thing. When we record down to 44.1 or we get into that, I mean, it's a medium that we've lived with. I totally agree tape would be just fabulous. But this all of a sudden doesn't have enough space for all of those 4 octaves above that are sounded so that we can hear. And when we compress, and I just hate, and I'm going to get on the soapbox right now, when we compress, the top is chopped off and then we push up the bass. And what bothers me is when I hear a pop recording, a rock recording that I would like to hear, and the bass all of a sudden sounds much louder than the kick drum, and it's shoved up, and all of a sudden there's this big bump there. The system doesn't have a bump in it, but there it is, and it just drives me out of the room. It's a hideous sound, and I just don't like that at all. But we are faced with this every day. We're faced with this in our recordings. And so you need to do what I would give Sir Hamilton Hardy when he asked his father, what do I need to do to become a musician? Now, Sir Hamilton Hardy is a 19th century composer, and his father said this: listen to as much music and play as much music as you can. Now, the real challenge that we have here is aligning live with recorded. That's our challenge. And it's really easy to know live. It really is easy. All you have to do is just spend some time. I'm fortunate that almost 365 days out of the year, I know what a clarinet sounds like. I know what a violin sounds like. I guest conduct all over the world. I know what various organizations sound like. They're all different. But you have to have a reference point about what real is. And once you have real in your brain, then you know. I'm not going to say anything about certain companies because it's not for me to say. But when I heard a piano player out here, a guest playing, let me tell you, that was real, as opposed to hearing something that may have been similar, that all of a sudden the mid-range is all muddied up, there's no clarity. Just please understand that when you're sitting in front of your sound system, here's the similarity. You may be able to control timbre by your choices. I control timbre by my choices in front of the organization, by whatever it is that you do for that rightness. And again, we're not in the format wars, whether it's tape, whether it's LP. That's not what it's about. But you do have an element of control. You can have that element of how broad does the sound sound? Where's the sound stage? Also, when you compress, things change. The relationships change. The spatial relationships change. Many times, when you will reduce the top and the bottom, the reverb will automatically change, and therefore the absence and presence of overtones, those change, which change the quality and timbre of the voice or the instrument. So compression is a real nasty thing. And so don't get fooled, please. Don't get fooled into thinking if it's louder, it's better. It's not. It's just not that way. So there are many similarities, and I think my 5 minutes is up in the sun. So I'm going to shift this back over to Bruce and to anybody that we need to continue.
Just one comment towards the end. And you said don't get fooled by the loudness. If you need loudness, first of all, we're going to get into this in a little bit here, but compression can add a perceived loudness, but it reduces dynamics. Most of you in this room are here at this show because you're looking for that real thing, so to speak, and you have to have dynamics. So the reason I put on these forums and I invite people to come in and speak about recording techniques, and Paul on tape and Cookie on DSD, and usually I prefer to get Marsha or Tam Henderson from Reference Recordings, who, by the way, in my opinion, started high resolution recording with reference recordings in the 70s, is so that you all gain an understanding that if you're going to spend $50,000, $100,000, I've been able to go into New York apartments where the guy took out the top floor because he had 8-foot ceilings and wanted 10-foot tall speakers. Okay, serious man. If you're that serious, then you need to get better source material. That's what this discussion is about at this point. Cables are something else. Cables distort. Tim's going to explain that at the end of this portion of the seminar. Yeah, when we move on, and then hopefully Cookie and Paul will show up on time. I'm sure Paul will. Cookie's schedule is always. Paul's back there. Hi, Paul. What the hell are you doing back there, man? Oh, great. Well, why don't you come on up here so we can listen to you? It's Paul Stubblebine. If you're going to spend that kind of money and you're that serious in your ears demand that kind of precision, then stay away from 44.1 16-bit red book compressed. That's the key. Recordings, because you're not going to get it. Cool. Put it in your car. I do. And I can tolerate most of it in my car, but I certainly can't tolerate it on one of my better, reference systems that I use as a tool at MIT. And this is really, you heard Lowell get emotional about it. You heard an emotional story from Tony. Music is emotional. I know you want to talk about that. Just wait a damn minute till I'm through. Yeah, you are a hog. I'm not inviting you anymore. Anyhow, seriously, folks, don't look into your HRX files from reference. These are WAV files. In fact, didn't you master them, Paul?
All the early ones.
Yeah. Okay. They were generated by loving, caring people. Tam Henderson, Keith Johnson, the recording whiz. They were put on tape. Now they've been transferred with great care by Keith Johnson at 176.4 by 24-bit. You buy them as WAV files, you store them in your computer, and you're listening as close as you're going to get to the master tapes. No compression. In fact, I think Paul will comment a little later on about how he uses minimal compression. A lot of the stuff coming out of, unfortunately, today out of Nashville is overly compressed. There's no dynamics. It plays loud, but it's always the same level of loudness. There's no... excuse me, no dynamics, okay? You wanted to comment again, sir? And then I'm going to let Tim close this up. And I think what I'm going to do is go to questions, and then we'll wait for the others. Huh? Okay, we're not out of time yet. Huh? Yeah, okay. So why don't we go into some... Yeah. Questions? Yes, sir.
Well, yeah. Over my years of playing with this, and it's a hobby for me, and I love it. But I focus on different aspects, and for the past couple of months, I've really been focusing on this aspect of both the absolute sound, and we all have our definitions of it. Yeah. Whether it's true to the original capture of the what came off the board, or whether it's the performance that was going into the microphone or phones, whatever. And a thought has been occurring to me, and I've been trying to focus through it on the linearity of what we hear versus I'm saying the linearity of what we hear.
I'm putting my ear for it because I want to hear what portion of linearity you're talking about.
Okay, well, what I mean by that is as soon as the performance is captured into the microphone, our goose is kind of cooked, because then it's being transduced, into something other than all those separate airwaves and the sound pressures and things from each individual instrument or each individual performance.
Paul, this is a good one for you to get your butt up here.
And then from that point forward, whether how cleanly it's recorded or whatever, and then how cleanly it's played out, there's still there's still that linear.
I'm gonna let Paul comment. This is Paul's end of the business. I would have comments on it. Okay, the first thing I'm gonna tell you is that everything you hear is from the perspective of what the microphones heard. Okay, so that's it. It starts right there. There's
I mean, we're in the live performance.
Yeah.
And you have a singer,
Okay. Why don't you, Paul? We're getting Paul geared up here to go,
Yeah, I didn't hear it in the back.
Yeah,
Just again, and then I'll ask it over the mic so everyone can hear it.
Well, I guess the question really is kind of going back to, can you really ever achieve, quote, the absolute sound if your definition of the absolute sound is really the performance that was being captured, because of the limitations on how you have to capture it and how it gets transduced into an electric signal, and how that it remains electric signal until it gets back transduced into something that gets pushed out into the air again.
His question is this on? Are you hearing me that back there? No? No? There we go.
His question is, can you ever really capture the absolute sound of a live performance and reproduce it? Because it has to be transduced from an acoustic signal to an electric signal through a various set of processes, transduced back through your loudspeakers to an acoustic signal. My personal opinion, no, you can't. As soon as it gets to the microphones, literally, it's a representation. The absolute sound can still be your guidepost for what you're doing, but I don't believe that with anything like our current technology we can actually totally reproduce the sound of a live event. The sound of a live event is a three-dimensional experience, and first just getting it into a couple of microphones and turning it into two-dimensional, and then hoping that the speaker and the speaker room interaction will bring back some of the spaciousness of it and good mic technique, especially in the case of Keith Johnson's recordings. Yes, we can suggest it. Yes, we can make something good enough that you can, with a little bit of willing suspension of disbelief, you can be carried away by the musicians and their artistry. But an actual recreation of the acoustic event, no, I don't think we can. If you're interested in trying it, though, I would say look into ambisonics, which at least attempts to make the three-dimensional aspect of the sound reproducible in space, and at its best does a very good job of it, but it's still a representation.
Thank you.
That plays right into my question. What is it about compression that strips away a lot of the ambient cues in music that makes it sound real and live in your room?
He asked, what is it about compression that strips away a lot of the ambient cues that make it sound live in your room? Which is an excellent question. We're now talking about audio compression, not data compression. You know, we have the same word for two different things. And we're now talking about audio compression, where you run it through a processor, whether you're using an analog tool or a digital tool, that clamps down on the peaks and boosts the low level to get a greater perceived loudness, or to get a greater average level through a chain that has a top limit. All of our recording technologies.
So we got this here, right?
Yeah.
So I can do this. So compression will bring this one down a little bit, the fundamental, and it'll bring some of these up slightly. And the difference is one of the reasons we just went through the first part of the presentation. Is this on? No.
Oh, you got another one there. You can use this one.
This one of the things that we went through in the first presentation was timbre was defined by the relative strengths or presence or absence of harmonics. What compression does is takes that red one and moves it down slightly and brings those blue ones up. It's going to change the timbre ever so slightly. It's also going to, since the other harmonics are higher, it'll decrease the dynamic range of that tone and it'll make everything sound a little bit louder. Now, as a guitar player, what I hear, and Bruce mentioned Nashville, we did some work in the 90s in Nashville, and man, nobody could record an acoustic guitar like the Cats in Nashville. You could tell it was a Gibson, a big box, or the sweet mid-range of a Martin. Now the stuff they're putting out that's so compressed, by compressing and raising those harmonics, your ear still knows it's an acoustic guitar, but that signature fingerprint are somewhat, they're gone, and it becomes a generic representation. When you apply that compression, the bus compression, to the entire performance, that includes all the instruments and the room cues. So the room cues get compressed, and the relationship for those harmonics is very subtle in amplitude. And now, to my ears, what happens is it brings a lot of it forward in the mix. You know, for example, when you're mixing a record down and you want to bring someone to the front, you'll add a tad of compression on them individually, maybe to bring the harmonics forward. You do that to the whole thing, and you know all the dynamic range is gone. It makes everything louder, but it ruins it in the process. Squashing it, we call it.
and think of what is the characteristic of reverberation? Is it decays. If you put everything through a compressor so it's all loud all the time, your ear cannot process it as ambience.
Any other questions or, okay. Let's go ahead then, move ahead with the next section.